inside any vape, whether it is a pod device, which is the ones that you kind of attach a little pod to, or if it's a disposable or a refillable, they have to have a tank inside them. The tank is filled with what we call e-liquid, or commonly known as vape juice. Vape juice has four main ingredients. The first is propylene glycol, or glycerin. This is just a carrier liquid, so it is there for other things to be absorbed into it. The other main things are glycerin has the same effect. It's a carrier liquid, nicotine, and flavorings. So these are the four main constituents of e-liquid. What happens is a metal coil, which is kind of suspended in the liquid, heats it up to around 200 to 300 degrees Celsius. The liquid then aerosolizes or turns into a vapor, and that's what you inhale. So yes, nicotine is the addictive component. And yes, you are literally inhaling chemical compounds or molecules of flavorings, also molecules of propylene glycol. So these very small molecules are similar to if you're spraying dry shampoo and you see that stuff, you spraying it in your hair, which is what I do because I'm a mom of 3 kids and I don't have time to wash my hair. I use it a lot. These are very, very small particles that contain physical components within them. So when you inhale them, they do sit in your lungs. We know that propylene glycol, glycerin are otherwise really widely used in things like cosmetics and food. But that's typically for topical application or ingestion. It is not for aspiration. It is not for going into your lungs. Our lungs, as you know, are very delicate structures. Anything that goes in there that's a little bit too large is going to embed into the tissue. And then your lungs are going to initiate a response that tries to get rid of it. So what we do see in vapors is basically inflammation of the respiratory tract and the lung tissue. So it's in a similar way that you would get for things like bushfire smoke. There are microscopic particles that are sitting in there that your lungs are trying to get rid of. So when we do imaging of young people's lungs who vapes, we see these pneumonia type, for want of a better word, globs. So kind of like a collection of tissue where you can see there's an inflammation response occurring. These flavors are not meant to be in our lungs. They might be safe for other uses, such as in makeup or skincare or in foods and flavorings, but not when you inhale them. So that is something that is really important to remember for parents and for anyone who's vaping. There's some really good data coming out of the US, the Population Assessment of Tobacco Health Study, the PATH study, that's looked at bronchitis symptoms among young people who vape and the risk of chronic bronchitis. So this is cough, extra phlegm production, signs of inflammation in your lungs, is 2 to 3 times higher among e-cigarette users. There was a recent article that was in The Guardian the other day demonstrating that the inhalation of vapes for different reasons to cigarette smoking can be as damaging. So there's a lot of chemicals in vapes that aren't in cigarettes. There's a lot of chemicals in cigarettes that aren't in vapes, but both can have really damaging impacts on our lungs.
And I know that we're early in the piece, but you would have to be suspicious that vaping is going to end up causing COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease a bit like smoking does. If you've got this chronic inflammation in your chest, it would seem that that's the route we're going to go down. It sort of feels so frustrating because I feel like for years we've done so well, and smoking rates, obviously this is your area of expertise, but like what have they gone from and to? It seems like smoking is just not cool and it doesn't really happen very much anymore at all. And now we've seen this take off. It's pretty disheartening as a doctor. You're like, no.
Exactly. And my PhD was in tobacco control, and Australia has done incredibly well in controlling tobacco rates over the past 30 years. So in the 90s, it was still very common for young people to smoke. So 18 to 24-year-olds, I think the rates were around 30% who'd said they'd ever smoked a cigarette. These days, it is so low, it's almost non-existent that young people smoke. We still do have percentage hovering around the sort of 2 to 5%, depending on the group that you're looking at. So it's almost gone, right? We were in a position where we had done so well with our public health campaigns, with our tobacco tax increases, plain packaging, removal of advertising, that it kind of removed smoking as a behaviour that was normal. The Smoke-Free Tobacco Act also had a huge impact. So this was the legislation that came in that said you can't smoke in buildings, in cars, in public places, on public transport, or within certain distance from buildings, right? So that had a huge impact on the public's acceptability of smoking. It became something that was just not done, right? So we got to this point and we were doing so well and we were lauding our success in tobacco control. And then along came vapes, and it's kind of undone that. At the start, a lot of the proponents or supporters of e-cigarettes to help people quit smoking said it's actually not making young people start smoking, it's just diverting them away from cigarettes. So let me unpack that. A young person who might have in their life become a smoker, instead of becoming a smoker, they have become an e-cigarette user. And that is what they have continued on using in their lifetime. So that we've diverted them away from the potential trajectory of being a smoker. That was the initial thinking. So back in 2013, when e-cigarettes were first measured at a population level in Australia, most of the use of vapes was among existing smokers. So everyone was sort of like, this is kind of a good thing, right? So instead of them smoking conventional combustible cigarettes, which are incredibly harmful and still kill 7 million people worldwide, they're diverting towards e-cigarettes. Unfortunately, what's happened over time is the number of young people who would never have smoked a cigarette or would never have used a tobacco product are picking up these devices. We're seeing higher rates of ever vaping than we did smoking, in the 90s. So it is not just the people who otherwise would have smoked who are picking up these products. These are kids who, without these products on the market, they might never have gone near them. So that's the thing that's really disheartening. And then there's the additional risk of young people then using vapes and transitioning to regular tobacco cigarettes. So that's something that the government have been really concerned about. These products are not only enticing a population of young people who would never otherwise have used vapes, but they're then transferring them onto big tobacco products, which are cigarettes, which are, still the leading cause of death in Australia. This is still unfolding. We don't know yet if that is the case. There's a lot of good evidence indicating that young people who do vape are 2 to 3 times more likely to then smoke. So it is looking in that direction. Whether that is because young people who pick up a vape have higher risk factors, a similar kind of risk factors that a smoker would. So they have peers or friends who smoke. They have other risk factors such as elevated mental health symptoms, for example. But even when we control for these factors, there's still an increased risk of smoking among young people. So yeah, it's completely disheartening. We were almost there. And then these devices came on board and it's kind of tobacco control is suddenly back on the agenda. And we're really sort of backpedaling.
I did do a little bit of reading which seemed to suggest there was some connection between vaping and depression. Is it a case of which came first, chicken or the egg? You're more depressed, so you're more likely to vape, or you're vaping and it's making you depressed? Do we know which one it is?
Look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We don't know which one it is first. We know that this is a very strong bidirectional relationship. So young people who have never vaped before but who have elevated symptoms of depression are twice as likely to vape. Young people who are vapers then are twice as likely to develop depressive symptoms over time. So we don't really know. The same relationship, interestingly, exists for regular cigarettes. So people who have mental illness are 2 to 3 times more likely to smoke combustible cigarettes. So whether this relationship is down to the nicotine and the way that nicotine works in the brain, which we can talk about, which is really fascinating, Or if it's potentially a self-medicating type behavior, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling like you're not coping, you reach for something that gives you that relaxed buzz, that feeling of just pausing and chilling out, a bit of a mood booster. Maybe it's that relationship. Again, data from the US, that same PATH study that I mentioned, found that relationship was bidirectional. But for young people who were vaping at the start, who didn't display depressive symptoms, as they continued to vape, their depression got worse over time. So there potentially is an effect that is going both ways. The depression might make you more likely to take up a vape for whatever reason that is. But then the vaping behavior over time might be degrading your mental health, potentially because you're using that as your coping mechanism. The impact that nicotine has on your brain is very short-lived. So you inhale nicotine, it hits your lungs, it goes to your brain within about 10 seconds, and you get this immediate mood boost. It is a stimulant drug. It is an anxiolytic drug. It reduces feelings of anxiety. That disappears very quickly. So you then get this withdrawal effect, and that can be very uncomfortable. So potentially we're seeing an interaction between the reward pathway in the brain and the development of mental disorders. It's a complex situation, and it very much, I suppose, to summarize it really nicely, chicken and the egg. I think there are risk factors in both directions.
So let's talk a little bit more about nicotine and why it seems to be so addictive, and what does it do and what does it do that's bad?
Absolutely. Look, if you were a business owner and you were the person who came up with the drug nicotine, you'd be a multi-bazillion squillionaire. It is the most effective drug that is out there. So as I said, nicotine can be inhaled, it can be absorbed through your skin, and it can also be absorbed through your oral mucosa, so your nose, your mouth. What happens is it hits your lungs, or it enters the bloodstream, and it goes to your brain. And nicotine then acts on these receptors in the brain, these neurotransmitters, which then produce feelings of pleasure. So this is your classic reward pathway. You get a hit of nicotine, it releases all these wonderful neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, and you get this very short-term effect of feeling relaxed, getting a little bit of a stimulant buzz, and also feeling calm, pleasurable. You get this warm, fuzzy kind of sensation. What happens over time is that feeling stops, and then your brain goes, hang on, no, that was really nice. More, please. I want more of that. So your brain changes its structure. It upregulates the number of receptors that it has in the brain in order to kind of attach more nicotine to it. So these are our nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Not very interesting for most people, but these are very reactive to nicotine. So the number of receptors in the brain increases. So what you need then is more nicotine to fill the number of receptors to get that same feeling. So the first hit of nicotine, people get this incredible response. It's incredibly pleasurable. The brain increases the number of receptors. Then you have your second same amount hit of nicotine, and your brain goes, oh, it was pretty good. Wasn't the best. A bit more, and it will feel better, right? So then you vape twice as much to get that same pleasurable feeling. The brain then responds again and goes, that was so great. Yep, more of that, please. Reinforcing that behavior. So then you need more. You need 3 hits to get that same pleasurable effect. This is the addiction cycle, and it continues on. So it is incredibly reinforcing. Your brain is basically telling you that thing that you've just given me, I'm going to keep changing my structure so you give me more over time. When you don't have nicotine administration, when you don't have a hit of your vape in that period of time, you get this horrible feeling of withdrawal, right? So say you wake up and you have a hit from your vape every morning. You wake up one morning and you don't have that hit, you are going to feel incredibly irritable. Your brain is seeking out the nicotine. So you'll feel anxious, you'll feel irritable, you might feel a bit nauseated. For people who are very chronic drinkers of coffee, or even caffeinated energy drinks or soft drinks, people go through the same level of withdrawal. They feel sick. And what makes you feel better in that scenario is more nicotine. So this withdrawal addiction cycle is incredibly strong for nicotine. So that's one of the things we're really battling. On top of this, the adolescent brain is different to the adult brain. So the adolescent brain is what we call incredibly neuroplastic. Young people are in a period of time neurodevelopmentally where their brain is forming new connections. The prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is rational decision making, being sensible, hasn't fully developed yet. But the base components of the brain, the things that drive our emotion, our sensation seeking, our reward response, is getting quite close to being fully developed. So you have this brain that is seeking out sensation, seeking out pleasurable and thrill-seeking type behaviors, but without that overlaying prefrontal cortex to say, hang on, that's probably not a great idea. So we see this across all adolescent behaviors. They are much more likely to be involved in road traffic accidents because of that sensation seeking, looking for the thrill of speeding, experimenting with substances, doing just silly things that adolescents do, right? When you add nicotine into this mix, it is the perfect storm because the brain is so neuroplastic. That response that I talked about, that upregulation, that increase in nicotinic receptors is even more pronounced in the adolescent brain. So it's no surprise that you're seeing and hearing reports of 15, 16-year-olds saying they are just so hooked. Their brain is wired to hook them on things that make them feel well. And that is just one of the most concerning things here. These products are actively marketed towards young people. The packaging appeals to them. The flavors appeal to them. It's shown on social media. So they're enticed to do it. And then once they try it, it can be very difficult to get off them because they just are so addictive. Yeah, it's a real concern.
And so is it big tobacco behind these, or who makes?
Look, that's an interesting question. There is a little bit of misperception in Australia that most of the vapes in Australia are big tobacco. They predominantly are not. They are mostly produced in China. And if anyone has a vape at home, you can actually have a look on the box. I can't remember the exact name of the factory, but it is in Shenzhen, I believe, so the southern part of China. The owner companies of the vape manufacturers in Australia are predominantly independent, kind of entrepreneurial people that live in the US, the UK, live in Australia, who kind of invested in these companies with a view to think, look, this might be a good kind of product to invest in. So it's predominantly not big tobacco. Big tobacco, however, are producing their own types of products that fill the same void in the market. So the European market is a bit different to ours. They have much more of the smokeless tobacco, like snus or tobacco pouches. Your listeners may have heard of Zins, Z-Y-N. So this is a nicotine pouch that is being produced, and this is predominantly big tobacco. So they are active in the field, obviously, to increase the number of young people in the market. In Australia, it is predominantly separate companies aside from big tobacco, but they are globally, obviously, a player in this space, and they are benefiting from young people entering into and using tobacco products because ultimately the goal is that then they will be lifelong consumers of, be it cigarettes, be it tobacco pouches, or whatever products they are producing.
Are you struggling to navigate the perimenopause or curious to learn more about the menopause from some of the top experts in this space? I am so excited to tell you about an upcoming event, She Thrives, an evening in conversation with myself, Dr. Kelly Casperson, who joined me in episode 89 for a brilliant chat about sex during midlife, and Dr. Vonda Wright, who was on episode 54, who shared how to conquer midlife and beyond with strength training and nutrition. Join us on Monday the 3rd of March at Newcastle City Hall from 7 p.m. A percentage of every ticket purchased will also be donated to the Debbie Gaunt Foundation, which supports women's mental health during these transitional years. To book your spot, click the link in the show notes. I can't wait to see you there. This is one you're not going to want to miss. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or other professional advice. Information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you have any health concerns, always consult your doctor.